The eviction notice arrived on the same frigid December morning that Rebecca Torres's ancient furnace finally gave up, leaving her and her 9-year-old daughter Emma shivering in their cramped apartment as the temperature outside plunged to negative 15 degrees. The notice was stamped in bold red letters, "Final demand, 72 hours to vacate," while the furnace repair estimate clutched in her other hand might as well have been a death sentence at $1,800. At 29, working 3 part-time jobs while raising Emma alone after her husband's deployment ended in a flag-draped coffin, Rebecca had mastered the brutal mathematics of poverty, but even her carefully orchestrated juggling act of late fees and payment plans was crumbling under the weight of Emma's ongoing medical treatments for juvenile diabetes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Standing in their kitchen that morning, watching her breath form clouds in the freezing air while Emma bundled under every blanket they owned to do her homework, Rebecca calculated the impossible equation that had become her daily reality. Rent was 7 days overdue at $1,400 for their 2-bedroom apartment in the cheapest complex she could find near Emma's school. The heating bill had climbed to $430 after 2 months of deferred payments. Emma's insulin and testing supplies, even with insurance, cost $350 monthly. And that was assuming no emergency. Room visits, like the one 3 weeks ago, that had resulted in another $2,000 medical bill. Her phone buzzed insistently on the counter, displaying a number she recognized as Emma's endocrinologist office. Rebecca's stomach twisted as she answered, knowing that medical offices didn't call with good news about overdue accounts. "Mrs. Torres, this is Jennifer from Dr. Patterson's office. I'm calling about Emma's upcoming appointment and the outstanding balance on your account. We'll need to reschedule unless we can arrange payment for the previous visits." The receptionist's voice was kind but firm, and Rebecca felt the familiar crushing weight of failing her daughter settle on her chest like a physical presence. "I understand," Rebecca managed, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her throat. "Can I call you back this afternoon? I'm expecting some work today that should help with the payment." It wasn't exactly a lie, she told herself as she ended the call. She was expecting work, desperately hoping for it, praying for any opportunity that would prevent their carefully constructed life from completely collapsing. Emma looked up from her homework, her dark eyes too wise for her 9 years, and Rebecca recognized the expression that broke her heart daily. It was the same quiet acceptance her husband Carlos had carried, the soldier's ability to endure hardship without complaint, a trait that Emma had inherited along with her father's stubborn determination and her mother's fierce intelligence. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Emma asked simply, and Rebecca realized that her daughter had overheard more of the phone conversation than she'd intended. "We're going to figure it out, mi amor," Rebecca replied, pulling Emma close and feeling how thin her daughter had gotten despite Rebecca's best efforts to ensure she ate first at every meal. "We always do, right? You and me, we're a team, and teams don't give up." The words tasted like ashes in her mouth because Rebecca wasn't sure she believed them anymore, but Emma needed to hear them, needed to believe that her mother could still fix everything, could still keep their small world from falling apart completely. The call that would change everything came at 11:30 that morning, just as Rebecca was calculating whether she could afford to buy Emma lunch at school or if they'd need to stretch the remaining food in their refrigerator another day. The caller ID showed Whitmore Estate Services, a name Rebecca didn't recognize, but which sounded official enough to make her answer with cautious hope. "Ms. Torres, this is Patricia Whitmore from Whitmore Estate Services. I got your name from the Regional Cleaning Contractors Association. I have an unusual opportunity that might interest you. though I should mention up front that it requires absolute discretion and involves some unique circumstances. The woman's voice was crisp, professional, with the kind of authority that suggested serious money behind the operation. Rebecca gripped the phone tighter, her pulse quickening. "I'm listening. What kind of opportunity?" Any legitimate work was a lifeline at this point, and she'd learned not to be picky about unusual circumstances if the pay was real. "We have a property in rural Pennsylvania, about 2 hours from your location. That requires comprehensive cleaning and organization. The estate has been settling for nearly 2 years, and frankly, previous contractors have found the assignment challenging due to the property's unique features and somewhat remote location. The pay is substantial, $5,000 cash upon completion, with an additional $2,000 bonus if the work is finished within 1 week. Rebecca's heart nearly stopped. $7,000 would solve their immediate crisis. Pay the rent, fix the heating, cover Emma's medical bills, and give them breathing room for the first time in months. What exactly would the work involve, and what makes it so challenging that other contractors couldn't handle it? Patricia Whitmore paused, and Rebecca could hear papers shuffling in the background. The property belonged to Senator Harold Ashford, who passed away suddenly last year. The estate is quite large, with multiple outbuildings and some unusual architectural features. Previous contractors have reported feeling unsettled by the isolation and some of the property's more unique aspects. There are also strict confidentiality requirements due to Senator Ashford's former position and the sensitive nature of some materials that may be present. The mention of a senator made Rebecca pause. She'd heard the name Harold Ashford in the news, remembered something about a powerful committee chairman who died unexpectedly, but politics had seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford when every day was focused on basic survival. What kind of sensitive materials? I need to know what I'd be dealing with, especially if I bring my daughter with me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Nothing dangerous," Patricia assured her quickly. "Mostly documents, personal papers, items that require careful handling due to their historical or political significance. The main house needs thorough cleaning and organization, and there's a basement area that previous contractors found particularly challenging due to its size and contents. I should mention that the property includes a caretaker's cottage where you'd be welcome to stay during the week, which might make the job more manageable." Rebecca's mind raced through the possibilities. A week away from their problems, somewhere Emma could rest and recover from the stress of their current situation, and enough money to genuinely change their circumstances. The caretaker's cottage would have heat and electricity, and it would be safe for my daughter? Absolutely. The cottage is fully equipped and comfortable. Senator Ashford was quite particular about maintaining all his properties to the highest standards. I should also mention that the estate is quite secure, with modern safety systems throughout. Your daughter would be perfectly safe, and there's even a small library in the main house that might keep her entertained while you work. The job sounded almost too good to be true, which made Rebecca's survival instincts kick in. She'd learned to be suspicious of opportunities that seemed too generous, but the woman's professional manner and the specific details suggested legitimacy. Why me specifically? And why is the pay so high if it's just cleaning and organization? Patricia's voice took on a slightly more personal tone. "To be frank, Ms. Torres, we need someone who can handle unusual circumstances without getting spooked or spreading gossip afterward. Your military family background suggests you're accustomed to discretion, and your cleaning service reviews indicate extremely thorough professional work. The high pay reflects both the scope of the project And the confidentiality requirements. Senator Ashford's family wants this handled quietly and completely. Rebecca thought of Emma's medical bills, of the eviction notice on their kitchen table, of the broken furnace and the empty refrigerator. She thought of her daughter's quiet acceptance of their struggles and her own growing desperation as every option seemed to lead to another dead end. Sometimes survival meant taking calculated risks, and this opportunity, however unusual, represented their best chance of climbing out of the hole that seemed to deepen every day. "I'll take it," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "When would I need to start, and how do I get the property details?" "Excellent. I'll email you the address, keys, and specific instructions within the hour. The estate is expecting you tomorrow morning, if that works with your schedule. I do want to emphasize again that absolute discretion is essential. Senator Ashford's family values their privacy, and any breach of confidentiality would result in immediate termination and potential legal action." After ending the call, Rebecca sat at their kitchen table, staring at the eviction notice, while Emma colored quietly nearby, her small fingers working carefully around the medical alert bracelet she wore constantly. The job felt like a gift from nowhere, a chance to solve their problems and give Emma the stability she deserved. But it also felt like stepping into unknown territory, accepting work from powerful people she didn't understand, in a place she'd never seen, for reasons that weren't entirely clear. That evening, as Rebecca helped Emma pack their clothes into 2 small suitcases, her daughter asked, "Mom, why are we going away? Are we running from something?" The question cut through Rebecca's careful explanations about work opportunities and adventure, striking at the heart of her own fears about what they were walking into. "No, baby, we're not running from anything. We're running towards something, toward a chance to make things better, to fix our problems and start fresh. Sometimes the best opportunities come from unexpected places, and we have to be brave enough to take them." Rebecca hoped her words carried more conviction than she felt, but watching Emma's face light up with excitement about their adventure reminded her why she was willing to take this risk. Rebecca spent the night researching Senator Harold Ashford online, learning about his decades-long career, chairing various defense and intelligence committees, his reputation for secrecy even within the notoriously private world of classified government work, and his sudden death from an apparent heart attack at his Pennsylvania estate. The news coverage was surprisingly limited for such a powerful figure, and several articles mentioned ongoing investigations into his business dealings and political connections that had been suspended following his death. The more she learned, the more Rebecca realized that accepting this job meant stepping into the orbit of forces far more powerful and complex than anything she'd encountered in her simple struggle for survival. But as she looked at the eviction notice on her kitchen table and listened to Emma's steady breathing from the next room, she knew that sometimes the most dangerous choice was not taking any risk at all. Their current path led only to homelessness and separation, to losing the little stability they'd managed to maintain. As dawn broke over their apartment, Rebecca loaded their suitcases into her temperamental Honda Civic, grateful that it had started on the first try despite the frigid temperature. Emma sat in the passenger seat with her diabetes management kit and a small backpack full of books and drawing supplies, chattering excitedly about the adventure ahead while Rebecca navigated through morning traffic toward an uncertain future. The GPS led them through increasingly rural Pennsylvania landscape, past small towns and farmland, into rolling hills covered with bare winter trees. With each mile, Rebecca felt further from the familiar struggles of their urban poverty and closer to something unknown and potentially dangerous, but she also felt, for the first time in months, a sense of possibility, of movement toward something better than the desperate day-to-day survival that had consumed their lives. The Ashford estate appeared through the trees like something from another world, a massive stone mansion set on hundreds of acres of wooded property, with outbuildings scattered across the landscape and a long, winding driveway that spoke of serious money and deliberate isolation. The caretaker's cottage sat near the main entrance, a comfortable two-bedroom structure that looked more luxurious than anywhere Rebecca and Emma had ever lived. As they unloaded their suitcases, Emma ran ahead to explore their temporary home, her delighted squeals echoing from the cottage as she discovered amenities they'd never had. A fireplace, a fully stocked kitchen, cable television, and reliable heating that filled every room with blessed warmth. Rebecca followed more slowly, her trained eye cataloguing security features and escape routes, her instincts telling her that this job would test every survival skill she'd developed. Standing in the cottage doorway, looking across the estate, toward the imposing main house where her work would begin, Rebecca felt the weight of the choice she'd made. She'd brought her daughter into the orbit of powerful people with hidden agendas, accepted money from sources she didn't fully understand, and committed to a week of work that everyone else had found too challenging to complete. But she'd also given Emma warmth, safety, and hope for the first time in months, and sometimes that was worth any risk. The mansion loomed against the grey winter sky, its windows dark and unwelcoming, holding secrets that powerful people had died to protect. Tomorrow, Rebecca would begin exploring those secrets, following a path that would lead her and Emma into the heart of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of American government. But tonight, they were warm, safe, and together. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Rebecca allowed herself to believe that everything might actually work out. The morning mist clung to the Ashford estate like a protective shroud as Rebecca approached the mansion's imposing front entrance, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp December air. Emma had insisted on coming with her for the initial walk-through, her curiosity overcoming any intimidation she might have felt about the massive stone structure that dominated the landscape. The keys Patricia Whitmore had provided turned smoothly in the heavy oak door, revealing an interior that took Rebecca's breath away with its combination of classical elegance and subtle modern security features. The foyer stretched before them, like a cathedral, with soaring ceilings, polished marble floors, and a grand staircase that curved upward toward the mansion's upper levels. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across oil paintings that depicted scenes of American history, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow Rebecca and Emma as they moved deeper into the house. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft echo of their footsteps and the distant hum of climate control systems that had kept the mansion perfectly preserved despite its emptiness. "Mum, this is like a castle," Emma whispered, her voice filled with wonder as she took in the grandeur surrounding them. Her small hand found Rebecca's, and together they began their exploration of what would become their workplace for the next week. Each room revealed new layers of Senator Ashford's complex life, from the formal dining room with its table set for 12 guests who would never arrive, to the library with its thousands of leather-bound volumes and comfortable reading chairs. Positioned near tall windows overlooking the estate grounds, Rebecca's trained eye began cataloguing the work ahead of her, noting areas that would require deep cleaning, organization, and careful attention to detail. The mansion was immaculate in its way, suggesting that Senator Ashford had employed a full staff until recently. But there were signs of hurried departure throughout the house. Personal items left in odd places, papers scattered across desk surfaces, and a general sense that normal life had been interrupted suddenly and never resumed. The kitchen, a masterpiece of modern convenience hidden within classical design, showed evidence of hasty meal preparation abandoned mid-process. Expensive ingredients had been left to spoil in the refrigerator, and cooking utensils remained exactly where they'd been dropped, as if whoever had been preparing food had simply vanished. Without warning, Rebecca made notes about deep cleaning requirements while Emma explored the butler's pantry, her excited discoveries of hidden doorways and secret storage areas adding an element of adventure to their serious work. It was in Senator Ashford's private study that Rebecca first encountered materials that made her pause and consider the true nature of her assignment. The massive mahogany desk was covered with documents bearing official seals and classification markings, folders labeled with code names that meant nothing to her but suggested serious government business, and correspondence with individuals whose names she recognized from news coverage of national security matters. These weren't the personal papers of a retired politician, but the active working materials of someone deeply involved in ongoing classified operations. Emma, meanwhile, had discovered a hidden compartment behind one of the study's bookcases, her natural curiosity and small size allowing her to explore areas that adult cleaners might have missed. "Mom, come look at this," she called excitedly, her voice muffled as she crawled through what appeared to be a maintenance access panel. "There's like a whole other room back here, and it has all these weird machines and screens and stuff." Rebecca followed her daughter's voice, finding herself crawling through a narrow passage that opened into a sophisticated communication center hidden behind the study's elegant facade. Banks of monitors displayed news feeds from around the world, encrypted communication terminals sat ready for use, and filing cabinets labeled with security classifications filled every available wall space. This wasn't just a politician's home office, but a command center designed to coordinate activities that extended far beyond normal legislative duties. The discovery sent a chill through Rebecca that had nothing to do with the December weather. Outside, she was beginning to understand why previous contractors had found this assignment challenging, and why the pay was so generous for what had been described as simple cleaning and organization. Senator Ashford's estate wasn't just a mansion filled with expensive furnishings and political memorabilia. It was a facility designed to support activities that powerful people desperately wanted to keep secret. But the most significant discovery awaited them in the mansion's lower levels, access through a door in the kitchen that Rebecca had initially assumed led to a standard basement storage area. The stairs descended much further than expected, carved from solid rock and illuminated by industrial-grade lighting that suggested serious engineering behind the mansion's construction. Emma's excitement grew with each step, her natural adventure-seeking spirit overriding any concerns about the increasingly unusual nature of their exploration. The basement revealed itself to be far more than storage space, stretching beneath the entire mansion and beyond, with tunnels branching off in multiple directions. Some areas contained standard mechanical equipment, heating systems, and electrical panels that would be expected in any large building. But other sections housed equipment that seemed designed for purposes Rebecca couldn't identify: sophisticated air filtration systems, backup power generators capable of supporting independent operations, and communication arrays that suggested the mansion was designed to function as more than a private residence. It was Emma who spotted the irregularity that would change everything, her sharp eyes noticing that one section of the basement wall didn't match the construction pattern of the surrounding areas. The stones were arranged differently, the mortar appeared newer, and when Emma pressed against what looked like a natural crack in the wall, a section swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a passage that disappeared into darkness beyond their flashlight beams. "Mom, it's like a secret door in the movies," Emma whispered, her excitement barely contained as she peered into the hidden passage. "Can we explore it, please? It might lead to treasure or something really cool." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Rebecca found herself torn between parental caution and her own growing curiosity about what lay beyond the concealed entrance. The passage beyond was clearly artificial, carved from bedrock and reinforced with modern materials that suggested recent construction, despite the mansion's historical appearance. Motion sensors activated lighting as they moved forward, illuminating a corridor that extended much further than the mansion's foundation should have allowed. Emergency exit signs provided navigation markers, and air quality sensors indicated that the passage was maintained with the same care as the mansion above. After what felt like a quarter-mile of walking, the passage opened into a vast, underground facility that took Rebecca's breath away with its scope and sophistication. They had discovered what could only be described as a fully functional underground city, complete with living quarters, operational centers, communication facilities, and storage areas that suggested preparation for extended occupation by large numbers of people. This wasn't just a basement or even a bunker, but a complete alternate world hidden beneath the Pennsylvania countryside. Emma ran ahead, her voice echoing through the cavernous spaces as she called out her discoveries. Dormitories with bunk, beds for hundreds of people, a medical facility that rivaled many hospitals, cafeterias equipped to serve thousands of meals, and recreation areas designed to maintain morale during extended stays underground. Every surface bore the presidential seal, and signs throughout the facility indicated that this was an official government installation, though one that didn't appear on any public records or architectural drawings. Rebecca's hands trembled as she photographed room after room with her phone, her mind struggling to process the implications of what they had discovered. This wasn't just Senator Ashford's private bunker or even a Cold War relic, but an active presidential emergency facility designed to house the entire federal government in the event of national catastrophe. The dates on equipment and supplies indicated recent maintenance and regular updates, suggesting that this facility remained operational and ready for immediate activation. The control center that dominated the facility's main level contained communication equipment capable of coordinating global military operations, situation rooms equipped with the most advanced decision-making technology, and displays showing real-time intelligence from sources around the world. Presidential protocols were posted on every wall, detailing procedures for continuity of government operations that would be implemented if Washington, D.C. became uninhabitable or compromised. But it was the facility's archives that revealed the true scope of what Rebecca and Emma had stumbled upon. Room after room of classified documents detailed decades of secret preparations for various national emergency scenarios, from nuclear war to terrorist attacks to natural disasters that could threaten the functioning of American democracy. These weren't theoretical plans, but operational procedures that had been tested, refined, and updated regularly by successive administrations. Emma's discovery of a map room filled with detailed tactical displays showed the extent of similar facilities hidden throughout the country, a network of underground installations designed to preserve government function regardless of what catastrophe might befall the nation's capital. Each location was marked with codes indicating capacity, specialization, and readiness status, revealing a shadow infrastructure that paralleled America's visible government institutions. The weight of their discovery settled on Rebecca like a physical burden as she realized the magnitude of what she and Emma had found. They weren't just cleaning a dead senator's mansion. They were documenting one of America's most classified secrets, a hidden system designed to ensure that democracy could survive even the complete destruction of Washington, D.C. The facility represented decades of planning and billions of dollars in investment, all hidden beneath the estate of a man whose public service had been only the visible portion of his true responsibilities. As they explored deeper into the facility, Rebecca began to understand why Senator Ashford had died so suddenly and why his estate had remained unsettled for so long. This wasn't just a house that needed cleaning, but a classified installation that required careful handling by people who understood the sensitive nature of what they were dealing with. Previous contractors hadn't been spooked by isolation or unusual architecture. They had discovered enough of the facility's secrets to realize they were in over their heads. The facility's residential quarters told the story of a man who had spent his final years not just as a senator, but as the caretaker of one of America's most important secrets. Personal items scattered throughout his private rooms showed a life lived in service to something larger than politics or personal ambition, a dedication to preserving democratic institutions, even if it meant sacrificing normal human connections and relationships. Emma's boundless energy led her to discover areas that Rebecca might have missed, including a vault containing backup copies of America's most important historical documents, a library preserving the intellectual heritage of democratic thought and communication centers designed to coordinate with similar facilities around the world. Each discovery revealed new layers of complexity and responsibility that came with knowledge of the facility's existence. But it was the facility's operational logs that provided the most sobering revelation of all. The installation wasn't just prepared for hypothetical emergencies. It had been activated multiple times during national crises that the public had never learned about. Presidential orders documented in the facility's records showed that America's leadership had been prepared to abandon Washington, D.C. on several occasions, ready to govern from hidden installations like the one Rebecca and Emma had discovered. The realization that they were standing in a facility that had been intended for use by the President of the United States, that the rooms around them had been designed to house the most powerful leaders in the world during America's darkest hours, filled Rebecca with a sense of awe that overwhelmed her initial fear. This wasn't just a bunker or a hiding place, but a testament to the lengths the dedicated public servants had gone to preserve democracy itself. As evening approached and they made their way back through the hidden passage to the mansion above, Rebecca felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. They had discovered something that powerful people had died to protect, something that could change how Americans understood their government and their security. The simple cleaning job that was supposed to solve their financial problems had become something far more complex and dangerous. But walking beside Emma, listening to her excited chatter about their incredible discovery and the adventure they were sharing, Rebecca also felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just hope for their immediate financial situation, but hope that ordinary people like themselves could still make a difference in the world, could still discover truths that mattered and find the courage to act on them. The mansion seemed different as they returned to it, no longer just an impressive display of wealth and power, but the visible portion of something far more significant. As they prepared dinner in the caretaker's cottage, Emma bubbling with excitement about their discoveries while Rebecca processed the implications of what they had found, both mother and daughter understood instinctively that their lives had changed in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. The night ahead would give Rebecca time to think, to plan, and to decide what to do with the knowledge they had gained. But already, she could feel the stirrings of the same courage that had carried her through the darkest days after Carlos's death, the same determination that had kept her fighting for Emma's future when everything seemed hopeless. They had discovered something extraordinary, something that demanded action, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Rebecca felt equal to the challenge ahead. The second day at the Ashford estate began with Rebecca making the most difficult decision of her adult life, staring at her reflection in the caretaker's cottage bathroom mirror, while Emma slept peacefully in the next room, unaware that their discovery had transformed them from anonymous cleaning contractors into custodians of one of America's most explosive secrets. The presidential emergency bunker beneath their feet represented not just classified government operations, but decades of preparation for scenarios that would terrify most citizens if they understood the true fragility of the systems they depended on for survival. Rebecca's phone showed 17 missed calls from Patricia Whitmore, each message growing more urgent as the estate manager demanded updates on their progress and specific assurances that they were following protocols for handling sensitive materials. But it was the final message, left at 3 in the morning, that made Rebecca's blood run cold with its barely concealed threat. "Ms. Torres, your silence is concerning. Please remember that your contract includes specific confidentiality provisions, with serious legal and financial consequences for any breaches. We need to discuss your findings immediately." The woman who had seemed so professional and accommodating during their initial conversation now revealed herself as someone accustomed to controlling information and intimidating people who might impose threats to carefully guarded secrets. Rebecca realized that accepting this job hadn't just brought them into contact with powerful people. It had made them potential liabilities in a game where the stakes were measured in national security and political survival rather than simple financial gain. But as Rebecca watched Emma wake up and stretch, her daughter's face bright with excitement about continuing their exploration of what she called the coolest secret base ever, Rebecca felt something stronger than fear settling in her chest. It was the same fierce protectiveness that had carried her through single motherhood, the same determination that had kept her fighting when medical bills and financial pressure threatened to destroy their small family. Emma deserved to grow up in a country where citizens could trust their government, where democracy operated with transparency rather than hidden beneath layers of secrecy and deception. Over breakfast in the cottage's warm kitchen, Rebecca made a decision that would define the rest of their lives. Instead of calling Patricia Whitmore back with reassuring lies about their progress, she began documenting everything they had discovered with the systematic thoroughness that had made her successful in her cleaning business. If powerful people wanted to keep America's emergency government facilities secret, they needed to provide better reasons than intimidation and legal threats. Emma proved to be an invaluable partner in this documentation process, her natural curiosity and fearless exploration revealing details that Rebecca's more cautious adult perspective might have missed. While Rebecca photographed official documents and operational procedures, Emma discovered personal items that told the human story behind the massive installation. Letters from presidents thanking Senator Ashford for his dedicated service, photographs showing him with world leaders during moments of international crisis, and journals documenting his growing concern about the expanding secrecy that surrounded America's emergency preparedness programs. The journals were particularly revealing, showing a man who had begun his career believing deeply in the necessity of hidden preparations for national catastrophe, but who had grown increasingly troubled by how these preparations had evolved into permanent shadow government operations. Senator Ashford's final entries described his intention to reveal the existence of facilities like the one beneath his estate, his belief that American citizens deserved to know about the billions of dollars being spent on installations they had never been told existed. "Mom, look at this," Emma called from the bunker's communication center, where she had discovered a secure terminal still displaying active connections to similar facilities across the country. The screen showed a map of the United States dotted with locations marked as continuity sites, each representing another underground installation designed to preserve government function during national emergencies. The scope was staggering, revealing a parallel infrastructure that existed completely outside public knowledge or democratic oversight. Rebecca's documentation efforts took on new urgency as she realized that Senator Ashford's death might not have been the natural heart attack reported in the news media. The timing was too convenient, occurring just as he had begun making inquiries about constitutional procedures for public disclosure of classified programs that had exceeded their original mandate. His journals described increasing pressure from colleagues who warned him about the dangers of transparency in matters affecting national security. The facility's medical bay provided another piece of the puzzle, containing sophisticated diagnostic equipment and treatment protocols that went far beyond what would be needed for normal emergency care. Chemical analysis equipment, toxicology, references, and specialized medications suggested capabilities for dealing with poisoning cases, assassination attempts, and other threats that went beyond natural disasters or foreign invasion. Someone had planned for the possibility that America's leaders might face internal threats from people who opposed their emergency powers. As Rebecca and Emma worked deeper into the facility's archives, they discovered evidence of times when the installation had been quietly activated during national crises that the public had experienced as merely difficult news cycles. Presidential communications from the facility showed that America's leadership had been prepared to govern from underground locations during the 2008 financial crisis, the 2016 election security concerns, and several other events that had been presented to the public as manageable challenges rather than potential existential threats to democratic institutions. The weight of this knowledge settled on Rebecca's shoulders like a physical burden, but it also clarified her sense of purpose in ways that surprised her with their intensity. For months, she had felt like a victim of circumstances beyond her control, struggling to keep her family afloat while larger forces determined their fate through medical bills, economic pressure, and systemic inequalities that made survival a daily battle. But standing in a facility designed to preserve American democracy, surrounded by evidence of how that democracy actually functioned behind the scenes, Rebecca felt a power she had never experienced before. Emma's excitement about their discoveries provided constant encouragement for Rebecca's growing determination to act on what they had learned. Her daughter's natural sense of justice, uncomplicated by adult fears about consequences and retaliation, cut through Rebecca's concerns about the personal risks they faced. "Mom, if this place is supposed to protect everyone, why is it a secret from everyone?" Emma asked as they explored living quarters designed to house congressional leadership during extended underground stays. "Doesn't that seem kind of backwards?" The question crystallized everything Rebecca had been feeling about their situation. The facility represented enormous public investment in preserving democratic institutions, but its secrecy meant that citizens had no voice in how those institutions would function during the emergencies that would matter most. The American people were being protected by a system they had never been allowed to understand, evaluate, or influence through normal democratic processes. Rebecca's phone finally rang with a call she couldn't ignore, showing Patricia Whitmore's number with an insistence that suggested serious escalation if she continued avoiding contact. She answered while standing in the facility's main command center, surrounded by displays showing real-time intelligence feeds and emergency communication, networks that connected to similar installations worldwide. "Ms. Torres, I've been extremely concerned about your lack of communication." Patricia's voice carried a sharp edge that hadn't been present during their initial conversation. "We need immediate confirmation that you're following proper protocols for handling classified materials, and we need detailed reports on exactly what you've encountered during your cleaning activities." Rebecca looked around at the presidential emergency facility surrounding her, at the evidence of decades of secret preparation for scenarios that could end American democracy as most citizens understood it, and made a choice that would define everything that followed. "Patricia, I think we need to have a conversation about what this job actually involves and what you expect me to do with what I've found here." The silence on the other end of the call stretched long enough for Rebecca to hear her own heartbeat. Before Patricia responded with careful precision, "Ms. Torres, your contract includes very specific provisions about confidentiality and the handling of sensitive materials. I hope you understand that those provisions exist for reasons of national security and that violations would be treated as seriously as any other breach of classified information protocols." "I understand that you're concerned about security," Rebecca replied, drawing strength from Emma's presence beside her as her daughter continued exploring the command center with fearless curiosity. "But I also understand that American citizens have rights to know how their government operates, especially when it involves billions of dollars in facilities built without public knowledge or oversight." Patricia's response came immediately, with the kind of prepared authority that suggested she had been anticipating this conversation. "Ms. Torres, you're dealing with matters far beyond your understanding or clearance level. These facilities exist to protect American democracy during existential threats. Public disclosure would compromise that protection and potentially endanger millions of American lives." Rebecca felt a surge of the same anger that had carried her through the worst days after Carlos's death, the fury at being told by powerful people that she was too simple to understand the forces affecting her life and her daughter's future. "Patricia, I may not have security clearances or political connections, but I understand democracy well enough to know that it can't survive if citizens aren't allowed to know what their government does in their name." The conversation ended with Patricia demanding that Rebecca remain at the estate until representatives could arrive to discuss the situation. But Rebecca had already made her decision about what came next. She would complete her documentation of the facility, ensure that Emma understood the historical significance of what they had discovered, and then find a way to share this information with people who could help the American public understand what had been built beneath their feet without their knowledge or consent. Emma's reaction to the phone conversation revealed the wisdom that had carried her through her young life's challenges with remarkable grace. "Mum, are we in trouble for finding something we weren't supposed to find?" she asked, her concern focused not on their personal safety, but on the justice of their situation. "Because it seems like if something this important is secret, maybe it shouldn't be." That evening, working by lamplight in the cottage while Emma slept, Rebecca began composing a detailed account of their discoveries, combining her systematic documentation with Senator Ashford's journals and the facility's operational records to create a comprehensive picture of America's hidden emergency government infrastructure. She wrote with the same careful attention to detail that had made her successful in her cleaning business, but now applied to the most important cleaning job of her life, exposing the dirt that powerful people had hidden beneath layers of classification and secrecy. The process of writing forced Rebecca to confront the personal transformation that had occurred since their arrival at the estate. 3 days ago, she had been a desperate single mother, willing to accept any work that could solve their immediate financial crisis. Now she was becoming something she had never imagined, a citizen who had accidentally gained access to information that could change how Americans understood their government, and who had found the courage to act on that access, despite the personal risks involved. Rebecca's account detailed not just the physical existence of the presidential emergency bunker, but the constitutional questions raised by its operation outside normal democratic oversight. If American government could function from hidden facilities during national emergencies, what prevented those emergencies from being declared unnecessarily or extended indefinitely? If billions of dollars could be spent on installations that citizens never learned about, what other programs operated beyond public knowledge or accountability? The facility's operational logs provided disturbing answers to these questions, showing how emergency protocols had been quietly activated during events that had never been presented to the public as true emergencies. Presidential communications from the underground command center revealed decision-making processes that bypassed normal constitutional procedures, treating elected representatives as potential security threats rather than democratic partners in governance. But Rebecca's account also captured the human story behind these revelations. The journey of a struggling mother and daughter who had discovered something extraordinary while simply trying to survive their immediate circumstances. Emma's fearless curiosity and natural sense of justice had provided the emotional courage needed to confront powerful people who preferred secrecy to accountability, while Rebecca's determination to protect her daughter had evolved into a commitment to protecting all American families from government operations they couldn't understand or influence. As dawn approached over the Pennsylvania countryside, Rebecca finished her account with a section dedicated to the memory of Senator Harold Ashford, a man who had spent his career protecting American democracy through necessary secrecy, but who had ultimately recognized that democracy couldn't survive if citizens were permanently excluded from understanding how their government actually functioned during the crises that mattered most. The morning brought new challenges, as black SUVs appeared on the estate's access road, carrying representatives of the powerful interests who wanted Rebecca's discoveries to remain buried beneath layers of classification and intimidation. But it also brought Emma's bright smile and excited questions about continuing their exploration, reminding Rebecca that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear when acting served something larger than personal safety. Standing at the cottage window, watching the vehicles approach while Emma ate breakfast and chatted about their plans for the day, Rebecca felt the same sense of purpose that had carried her through every challenge since Carlos's death. They had discovered something that mattered, something that gave their struggles meaning beyond mere survival, and Rebecca was determined to ensure that their accidental role in history would serve the cause of transparency and democratic accountability, rather than the convenience of powerful people who preferred operating in darkness. The game was about to change in ways that Rebecca couldn't fully anticipate, but she was no longer the desperate woman who had accepted this job 4 days ago. She was a citizen who had gained knowledge that came with responsibility, a mother who had found a way to fight for her daughter's future that went beyond paying medical bills and avoiding eviction, and an American who had discovered that ordinary people could still make extraordinary differences when they found the courage to speak truth to power. The black SUVs rolled up the estate's circular driveway with the kind of precision that spoke of military training and government authority, their tinted windows reflecting the morning sun as they formed a semicircle around the caretaker's cottage, where Rebecca and Emma had spent the night preparing for exactly this confrontation. Rebecca watched from the kitchen window as men and women in dark suits emerged from the vehicles, their movements coordinated and purposeful, carrying briefcases and communication equipment that suggested this wasn't a casual visit to discuss contract modifications. Emma stood beside her mother, clutching the tablet where they had compiled their documentation of the underground facility, her 9-year-old mind processing the gravity of their situation with remarkable clarity. "Mum, these are the people who want to keep the secret, aren't they?" she asked, her voice steady despite the obvious tension in the air. "The ones who think regular people aren't smart enough to know what their own government does?" Rebecca squeezed her daughter's hand, drawing strength from Emma's fearless assessment of their circumstances. Over the past 4 days, Emma had transformed from a child struggling with the adult worries forced on her by their financial crisis into a young person who understood that some fights were worth having, regardless of the personal cost. Her courage had become Rebecca's anchor, reminding her that this confrontation was about more than their immediate safety or even their financial survival. The lead agent who approached the cottage door carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to having her demands met without question, but Rebecca noticed something in her expression that suggested professional respect rather than simple intimidation. When Rebecca opened the door, the woman introduced herself as Agent Sarah Mitchell from the Department of Homeland Security, her tone formal but not hostile as she requested permission to enter and discuss the situation they had discovered. "Ms. Torres, I want to begin by acknowledging that you and your daughter have found yourselves in an extraordinary situation through no fault of your own," Agent Mitchell said as she settled into the cottage's living room, her colleagues positioning themselves strategically but not threateningly throughout the space. "What you've discovered is indeed classified at the highest levels, but that doesn't mean we view you as criminals or enemies of the state." Rebecca remained standing, keeping Emma close beside her as she evaluated the agents who had come to manage their inconvenient knowledge. These weren't the intimidating enforcers she had expected, but professionals who seemed genuinely concerned about finding a solution that protected both national security and the rights of citizens who had accidentally gained access to information they were never meant to see. "Agent Mitchell, I appreciate your professional courtesy, but I need to understand what you expect from us," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the confidence she had developed over 4 days of grappling with the implications of their discovery. "Are you here to threaten us into silence, to make us disappear, or to have an actual conversation about what we've found and what it means for American democracy?" Agent Mitchell's response surprised Rebecca with its directness and apparent sincerity. "Ms. Torres, the facility you've discovered represents decades of careful planning to ensure continuity of government during catastrophic emergencies. These preparations exist because American democracy is more fragile than most citizens realize, and because the consequences of being unprepared during a true national crisis would be measured in millions of lives lost and the permanent collapse of constitutional government." Emma stepped forward with the kind of courage that had sustained her through years of adult responsibilities thrust upon her too early. "But why does it have to be secret from everyone? If it's supposed to protect people, shouldn't people know about it so they can make sure it's done right?" Her question cut through layers of bureaucratic complexity to reach the heart of the constitutional issues their discovery had raised. The agent looked at Emma with what appeared to be genuine respect before responding. "That's an excellent question, and it's one that people much more senior than me have been debating for decades. The concern has always been that public knowledge of these facilities could compromise their security or create panic about scenarios that may never occur." Rebecca felt the moment shifting in their favor as she recognized that Agent Mitchell was engaging with them as rational adults rather than treating them as problems to be managed or eliminated. This was an opportunity to have the kind of conversation that could lead to real solutions rather than temporary suppression of inconvenient truths. "Agent Mitchell, I understand the security concerns, but I've spent the past 4 days studying Senator Ashford's journals and the facility's operational records," Rebecca said, moving to retrieve the documentation they had compiled. "What I've found suggests that these emergency powers have been activated multiple times during events that were never presented to the public as true emergencies. That raises questions about whether these preparations are still serving their original purpose, or have evolved into something else entirely." The agent's expression shifted as Rebecca presented evidence of the facility's actual usage history, documents showing presidential communications from the underground command center during events that the public had experienced as routine political or economic challenges. Agent Mitchell examined the materials with obvious expertise, her professional demeanor revealing increasing concern as she processed the implications of what Rebecca and Emma had discovered. Ms. Torres, this information represents a level of operational detail that even most government officials aren't authorized to access, Agent Mitchell said, her tone becoming more serious as she realized the scope of their documentation. How you've obtained this level of insight into classified programs could itself become a national security concern. Emma interrupted with the kind of moral clarity that adults often lost in the complexity of bureaucratic procedures and political considerations. But if the people who are supposed to protect democracy are hiding how democracy actually works, isn't that the real problem? Isn't protecting secrets less important than protecting truth? Her words seemed to resonate with Agent Mitchell in ways that surprised everyone in the room, including the other agents who had been observing the conversation with professional detachment. Rebecca realized that they were dealing with people who had entered government service to protect American values, not to suppress them, and who were struggling with the same constitutional questions that had troubled Senator Ashford in his final months. Emma, you're asking questions that go to the heart of how democratic governments balance security with transparency, Agent Mitchell replied, her official persona giving way to something more personal and conflicted. The people who created these facilities believed they were protecting democracy, but you're right to ask whether democracy can survive if citizens never learn how their government actually functions during the crises that matter most. The conversation continued for hours as Rebecca and Emma shared their complete documentation with agents who proved to be far more interested in understanding the constitutional implications than in simply suppressing inconvenient revelations. Agent Mitchell revealed that Senator Ashford had been in communication with oversight committees about his concerns regarding the expansion of emergency government powers, and that his sudden death had prevented a planned congressional briefing about the need for greater transparency in continuity of government operations. Rebecca's systematic documentation of the facility proved invaluable in reconstructing Senator Ashford's intended presentation, providing evidence that could support legislative efforts to bring these programs under proper democratic oversight, without compromising their essential security functions. Agent Mitchell explained that there were members of Congress who had been pushing for exactly this kind of transparency, but who had lacked the detailed evidence needed to challenge decades of classification and secrecy. Ms. Torres, what you and Emma have compiled here could serve as the foundation for real reform in how America balances emergency preparedness with democratic accountability, Agent Mitchell said as she reviewed their materials. But that would require you to work with congressional oversight committees and possibly testify before classified sessions about what you've discovered. Emma's response demonstrated the wisdom that had carried her through challenges that would have overwhelmed many adults. Would that help make sure that other families like ours get to know what their government does? Would it make democracy work better for regular people? Her questions focused on the practical impact of their potential testimony, rather than the personal benefits or risks they might face. Rebecca felt the same sense of purpose that had sustained her through the darkest periods after Carlos's death. The recognition that some opportunities to make a meaningful difference came with responsibilities that transcended personal comfort or safety. Agent Mitchell, if our experience can help ensure that American citizens have the transparency they deserve about how their government operates, then we're willing to take whatever risks that involves. The next phase of their journey began with secure transportation to Washington, D.C., where Rebecca and Emma found themselves in the surreal position of being honored guests rather than detained security risks. The Congressional Intelligence Oversight Committee had been seeking exactly the kind of evidence they had compiled, and their accidental discovery had provided the catalyst needed for long overdue reforms in emergency government operations. The private briefing room, where they met with senators and representatives, felt like a place where history was made through careful deliberation rather than dramatic confrontation. Rebecca presented their findings with the same systematic thoroughness that had made her successful in her cleaning business, while Emma provided the moral clarity that cut through political complexity to focus on fundamental questions about democratic governance and citizen rights. Senator Maria Gonzalez, who chaired the Oversight Committee, listened to their testimony with the kind of attention that suggested genuine commitment to addressing the constitutional issues they had uncovered. Ms. Torres, Emma, what you've brought to our attention represents both a security concern and an opportunity for democratic renewal, she said, after reviewing their documentation. These facilities exist to protect American democracy, but your discovery has shown us that protection without accountability can become a threat to the very values we're trying to preserve. The committee's response exceeded Rebecca's most optimistic expectations, with bipartisan agreement that emergency government programs required the kind of transparency that would allow democratic oversight without compromising essential security functions. The legislation that emerged from their testimony, dubbed the Ashford Transparency Act, established procedures for congressional oversight of continuity of government operations while maintaining necessary security protections. But the most meaningful outcome of their Washington experience was the recognition that ordinary citizens could still play vital roles in protecting and improving American democracy. Rebecca and Emma's story became a powerful example of how accidental discoveries could lead to intentional reforms, how single mothers struggling with medical bills and eviction notices could end up contributing to constitutional governance, and how children's moral clarity could illuminate adult complexities in ways that led to better solutions. The financial rewards that followed their testimony solved their immediate crisis and provided security they had never imagined possible. But Rebecca recognized that the real transformation in their lives came from discovering that they could make differences that mattered beyond their personal survival. Emma's diabetes would still require careful management, and they would still face the ordinary challenges of single parenthood, but they would face them with the knowledge that they had contributed something meaningful to the democratic system that protected all American families. 6 months later, standing before the completed Ashford Memorial Center for Government Transparency, Rebecca and Emma watched as visitors learned about the constitutional questions raised by emergency government operations and the importance of citizen involvement in democratic oversight. The presidential bunker beneath Senator Ashford's estate had been transformed into an educational facility where Americans could understand both the necessity of emergency preparedness and the vital importance of democratic accountability in how those preparations were implemented. Emma, now recognized as the youngest person ever to contribute to congressional intelligence oversight, had become an advocate for civic education programs that helped other young people understand their roles as citizens in a democratic society. Her natural curiosity and moral courage had evolved into leadership skills that promised to serve American democracy for decades to come. Rebecca's cleaning business had evolved into a consulting service that helped government agencies implement transparency initiatives while maintaining necessary security protections. Her experience navigating the balance between classification and accountability had made her valuable to organizations trying to reform systems that had grown too comfortable with secrecy as a default approach to complex problems. But their most important legacy remained the example they had set for ordinary Americans who might find themselves in positions to make extraordinary contributions to democratic governance. Their story proved that citizenship wasn't just about voting or paying taxes, but about having the courage to act when accidental knowledge came with democratic responsibilities that transcended personal convenience or safety. The cottage where their journey had begun now served as a residence for visiting scholars, studying the intersection of emergency preparedness and democratic transparency. Rebecca and Emma returned there regularly, not as cleaning contractors trying to survive financial crisis, but as citizens who had helped ensure that American democracy could survive the challenges of modern governance while remaining true to the values of transparency and accountability that made democratic government worth preserving. Standing in the cottage's warm kitchen, where they had made the decision to document rather than ignore what they had discovered, Rebecca often reflected on how much their lives had changed since that desperate December morning when eviction notices and broken furnaces had driven them to accept work they didn't understand. They had found more than financial salvation in the Ashford estate's hidden secrets. They had found their calling as citizens committed to ensuring that American democracy remained worthy of the sacrifices made to preserve it. Emma's diabetes management had become routine rather than crisis-driven, supported by excellent medical care and the financial security that came with their new circumstances. But more importantly, her sense of purpose had evolved from simply surviving childhood challenges to actively contributing to solutions that would benefit other children facing similar struggles with government systems that affected their lives. In ways they rarely understood, their story had become part of the curriculum in civics classes across the country, teaching young Americans that democracy required active participation from citizens who were willing to ask difficult questions and demand accountability from their government. Rebecca and Emma had proved that ordinary people could still make extraordinary differences when they found the courage to act on knowledge that came with democratic responsibilities, transforming accidental discoveries into intentional contributions to the ongoing project of American self-governance. The transformation that followed Rebecca and Emma's congressional testimony exceeded anything they could have imagined during those desperate December days when financial crisis had driven them to accept cleaning work at a dead senator's estate. Within 18 months of their discovery, the Ashford Transparency Act had fundamentally altered how America balanced national security with democratic accountability, creating oversight mechanisms that preserved essential emergency capabilities, while ensuring that citizens could understand and influence how their government prepared for potential crises. Rebecca found herself at the center of a movement that extended far beyond emergency bunkers and classified facilities, becoming a leading voice for what journalists had dubbed accidental transparency, the principle that citizens who stumbled upon government secrets through legitimate activities deserved protection and support, rather than intimidation and suppression. Her speaking engagements at universities, civic organizations, and government reform conferences drew audiences hungry for examples of how ordinary Americans could still influence the democratic process through courage and persistence rather than wealth and political connections. The National Democratic Oversight Foundation, established with bipartisan congressional support, chose Rebecca as its first executive director specifically because her background demonstrated that effective government accountability required leadership from people who understood the real-world impact of policy decisions on struggling families. Her salary provided financial security that allowed Emma to focus on her education without the constant stress of medical bills and housing instability. But more importantly, it gave Rebecca a platform to advocate for systemic changes that would help other single mothers navigate the complex intersection of personal crisis and civic responsibility. Emma's role in their story had evolved from accidental discoverer to intentional advocate, her natural leadership abilities refined through participation in youth civic engagement programs that used their experience as a case study in how democratic participation could take unexpected forms. At 11 years old, she had become the youngest person ever invited to address the National Civics Education Conference, where her presentation on why kids should know what government does received standing ovations from educators who recognized her ability to articulate complex constitutional principles in terms that resonated with audiences of all ages. The diabetes that had once represented an insurmountable financial burden had become manageable through excellent medical care. But Emma had transformed her personal experience with chronic illness into advocacy for healthcare transparency that helped other families understand their rights and options when dealing with medical emergencies. Her testimony before the House Healthcare Oversight Subcommittee about the connection between financial stress and health outcomes had influenced legislation requiring hospitals to provide clear information about treatment costs and payment options before non-emergency procedures. Rebecca's work with the Democratic Oversight Foundation focused on developing systems that would identify and protect future accidental whistleblowers, citizens who discovered government secrets through legitimate activities and needed support. To navigate the complex legal and ethical challenges that came with such knowledge, her team had created protocols that balanced national security concerns with constitutional rights, ensuring that people in similar situations would receive legal protection and professional guidance rather than intimidation and threats. The Foundation's first major success story involved a construction worker in Nevada who had discovered evidence of illegal surveillance programs while repairing government office buildings, and whose decision to report his findings had led to congressional investigations that resulted in significant reforms to domestic intelligence operations. Rebecca's personal involvement in protecting and supporting this whistleblower demonstrated how her experience had created institutional knowledge that could help other Americans navigate similar challenges with greater confidence and support. Emma's academic performance had flourished in the stable environment their new circumstances provided, but her most impressive achievements came through her volunteer work with organizations that helped other children affected by their parents' civic engagement activities. She had developed peer support programs for young people whose families faced retaliation or harassment for reporting government misconduct, drawing on her own experience to provide practical advice and emotional support for children dealing with extraordinary circumstances. The presidential bunker beneath the Ashford estate had been transformed into the Ashford Center for Democratic Education, where visitors could learn about both the necessity of emergency government planning and the vital importance of citizens' oversight in ensuring that such planning remained consistent with constitutional principles. Emma served as a youth ambassador for the center, leading tours that helped other young people understand how accidental discoveries could become opportunities for democratic participation and civic leadership. Rebecca's relationship with Agent Sarah Mitchell had evolved into a professional partnership that demonstrated how government officials and citizen advocates could work together to strengthen democratic institutions rather than simply protecting bureaucratic interests. Mitchell had been promoted to lead the Department of Homeland Security's new Transparency and Accountability Division, where she implemented many of the reforms that Rebecca's foundation had recommended for balancing security needs with democratic oversight requirements. Their collaboration had produced training programs for government employees who encountered citizens with accidental access to classified information, emphasizing dialogue and problem-solving rather than intimidation and suppression as the primary response to such situations. These programs had been adopted across multiple federal agencies, creating a culture of transparency that encouraged productive engagement with citizen concerns rather than automatic classification of anything that might be politically sensitive. The media attention surrounding their story had created opportunities for Rebecca to influence public discourse about the role of ordinary citizens in democratic governance. But she had been careful to focus on systemic issues rather than personal celebrity. Her op-ed columns in major newspapers addressed topics ranging from the constitutional implications of permanent emergency powers to the practical challenges facing single parents who wanted to participate more actively in civic life but lacked the time and resources to engage with complex political processes. Emma's influence had extended into educational policy through her work with curriculum developers who wanted to incorporate real-world examples of civic engagement into social studies programs. Her input had helped create lesson plans that used their story to teach students about constitutional principles, government accountability, and the rights and responsibilities of citizenship in ways that made abstract concepts concrete and personally relevant. The financial security that came with Rebecca's foundation work had allowed them to establish a college scholarship program for children of families affected by government transparency issues, providing educational opportunities for young people whose parents had faced professional or personal consequences for reporting misconduct or challenging official secrecy. The scholarship recipients formed a network of emerging leaders committed to public service and democratic accountability. Rebecca's speaking engagements had taken her to international conferences, where she shared American experiences with transparency and accountability with democracy advocates from around the world. Her presentations in countries struggling with authoritarian governance demonstrated how citizen action could influence even well-established systems of government secrecy, inspiring activists who faced far greater personal risks for their democratic participation than anything Rebecca and Emma had encountered. The Ashford estate itself had become a symbol of how private wealth could be transformed into public benefit through the kind of accidental discovery that revealed hidden connections between personal and political interests. The mansion's public rooms housed exhibits about the history of American emergency planning, while the restored bunker provided visitors with realistic understanding of both the capabilities and limitations of government crisis management systems. Emma's diabetes management had become so routine that she rarely thought about the medical crisis that had initially driven their family toward financial desperation. But she had maintained her advocacy for healthcare accessibility as part of her broader commitment to ensuring that government systems served ordinary families, rather than simply protecting institutional interests. Her work with pediatric advocacy organizations had helped develop policies that prevented medical emergencies from creating the kind of cascading financial crises that had nearly destroyed their family. The cottage where they had lived during their week of discovery had been preserved as a retreat center for families dealing with the stress of civic engagement activities, providing a safe space where people could process the emotional and practical challenges that came with standing up to powerful interests. Rebecca had designed the programs offered at the retreat based on her own experience of finding courage to act despite fear and uncertainty about the consequences of transparency. Their story had inspired a documentary film that won numerous awards for its portrayal of how accidental heroism could emerge from desperate circumstances. But Rebecca had insisted that any profits from the film be donated to organizations supporting government accountability and civic education. The film's success had created additional platforms for discussing the importance of protecting and supporting citizens who found themselves in positions to contribute to democratic oversight and reform. Emma's leadership in youth civic organizations had caught the attention of university admissions officers who recognized her unique combination of practical experience with government systems and academic excellence in constitutional studies. She had received early admission offers from multiple prestigious universities, each eager to support her continued development as a leader in democratic governance and citizen advocacy. Rebecca's work had evolved beyond government accountability to address the broader question of how American democracy could adapt to modern challenges while preserving its foundational commitment to citizen participation and governmental transparency. Her research and advocacy had influenced academic discussions about the future of democratic institutions and the role of technology in either enhancing or undermining civic engagement and official accountability. The National Security Council had invited Rebecca to serve as a citizen advisor on policies affecting the balance between security and transparency, recognizing that her experience provided insights that career government officials might lack about how classification decisions affected public trust and democratic participation. Her appointment had been confirmed unanimously by the Senate, with senators from both parties praising her commitment to serving national interests while protecting constitutional principles. Emma's work with international youth organizations had connected her with young people from around the world who were working to strengthen democratic institutions in their own countries, creating a global network of emerging leaders who shared commitment to transparency, accountability, and citizen participation in governance. Her presentations at international conferences had been translated into multiple languages and used as educational materials in countries where civic engagement carried significant personal risks. The transformation of their circumstances from desperate financial crisis to influential civic leadership had never made Rebecca forget the single mothers who continued to struggle with the same challenges she had faced during those dark December days when eviction notices and medical bills had seemed insurmountable. Her foundation's family support programs provided practical assistance to parents dealing with financial stress while trying to participate in civic activities, ensuring that economic hardship didn't prevent citizen engagement in democratic processes. Their legacy had become larger than their individual story, representing proof that American democracy remained responsive to citizen action when that action was informed by genuine concern for constitutional principles and community welfare, rather than personal advantage or political ambition. Rebecca and Emma had demonstrated that accidental discoveries could become intentional contributions to democratic governance when citizens found the courage to act on knowledge that came with civic responsibilities. Standing together at podiums across the country, mother and daughter had become powerful advocates for the principle that democracy worked best when ordinary citizens had the information, support, and protection they needed to hold their government accountable to the values and interests of the people it served. Their journey from financial desperation to national influence had proved that extraordinary contributions to democratic society could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances, when courage and conscience combined to transform personal crisis into public service. The cottage, the bunker, and the mansion had all been preserved as monuments to the possibility that American democracy could still be renewed and strengthened through the actions of citizens who refused to accept that government secrecy was always necessary, or that ordinary people lacked the authority to demand accountability from their elected representatives. Rebecca and Emma Torres had proved that democracy's greatest strength lay not in its institutions, but in its citizens' willingness to act when action served the common good rather than personal comfort. 5 years after their world-changing discovery at the Ashford estate, Rebecca Torres stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, addressing delegates from 193 nations about the fundamental relationship between government transparency and global democratic stability. The woman who had once counted pennies to buy her daughter a juice box now spoke with the authority of someone whose accidental heroism had evolved into intentional leadership on issues that affected billions of people worldwide. Emma, now 14, and serving as the youngest ever UNESCO Youth Ambassador for Democratic Education, sat in the gallery watching her mother deliver a speech that would influence international policy on government accountability and citizen rights. The shy 9-year-old who had discovered a presidential bunker while helping with inventory work had matured into a confident advocate whose insights about youth civic engagement were sought by educational leaders, policymakers, and democracy activists across the globe. Rebecca's presentation to the UN focused on the Ashford Principles, a framework for balancing national security with democratic transparency that had been adopted by 17 countries seeking to strengthen their democratic institutions, while maintaining necessary government functions. Her work with the International Democracy Foundation had demonstrated that the constitutional questions raised by their discovery in Pennsylvania had global implications for how modern democracies manage the tension between security needs and citizen rights. The speech represented the culmination of a journey that had taken Rebecca from desperate single motherhood to international recognition as a leading voice for democratic reform. But her remarks emphasized the continuing struggles of ordinary families rather than celebrating her personal transformation. She spoke about meeting single mothers in countries around the world who faced the same impossible choices between financial survival and civic participation that had once defined her own daily existence. Emma's work with UNESCO had focused on developing educational programs that helped young people understand their roles as global citizens in an interconnected world, where democratic values face challenges from authoritarian governments, corporate power, and technological surveillance systems that could undermine privacy and accountability. Her presentations to international education conferences had influenced curriculum development in dozens of countries, making civic engagement and government accountability standard topics in schools from Finland to South Africa. The diabetes that had once threatened to bankrupt their family had become a platform for Emma's advocacy work with the World Health Organization, where she had helped develop policies ensuring that chronic illness didn't prevent young people from participating in democratic processes. Her testimony before the WHO Global Youth Health Council had led to international guidelines protecting the rights of children with medical conditions to engage in civic activities without discrimination or exclusion. Rebecca's memoir, The Accidental Whistleblower: How a Cleaning Job Changed American Democracy, had become required reading in political science programs worldwide. But she had insisted that all international royalties be donated to organizations supporting democracy activists in countries where transparency advocacy carried serious personal risks. The book's success had created additional platforms for discussing how ordinary citizens could contribute to democratic governance without sacrificing their family's security or well-being. The Ashford Center for Democratic Education had become a pilgrimage site for democracy advocates from around the world, hosting international conferences that brought together citizens, activists, scholars, and government officials to share strategies for strengthening democratic institutions. Emma had developed youth leadership programs at the center that prepared young people to navigate complex civic challenges while maintaining their commitment to transparency and accountability. Rebecca's work with the International Criminal Court had focused on developing legal protections for citizens who discovered evidence of government misconduct through legitimate activities. ensuring that accidental whistleblowers received the same legal safeguards as intentional transparency advocates. Her advocacy had influenced international law regarding the protection of civilian witnesses in cases involving government accountability and democratic reform. The National Security Council position that Rebecca had accepted 3 years earlier had evolved into a cabinet-level appointment as the first director of democratic transparency, a new position created specifically to ensure that America's national security policies remained consistent with constitutional principles and democratic values. Her confirmation hearing had attracted international attention as an example of how grassroots civic engagement could influence the highest levels of government decision-making. Emma's academic achievements had earned her early admission to Harvard University's joint program in international relations and constitutional law, but she had deferred enrollment to spend a gap year working with democracy organizations in countries transitioning from authoritarian rule to democratic governance. Her work in Eastern Europe and Latin America had provided practical experience in how democratic institutions could be established and strengthened in societies recovering from periods of repressive government. The scholarship program that Rebecca and Emma had established for children of transparency advocates had grown into an international network, providing educational opportunities for young people whose families had faced persecution for challenging government secrecy. The scholarship recipients had formed a global community of emerging leaders committed to democratic values and government accountability, creating connections that transcended national boundaries and cultural differences. Rebecca's relationship with Agent Sarah Mitchell had evolved beyond professional collaboration to genuine friendship, with Mitchell serving as the godmother Emma had never had and providing the kind of stable adult support that had helped both mother and daughter navigate their extraordinary circumstances. Mitchell's own career had flourished as her innovative approaches to transparency and security had been adopted throughout the federal government, demonstrating that Rebecca's influence had extended into institutional reform as well as public advocacy. The cottage at the Ashford estate had been transformed into an international retreat center, where democracy activists from around the world could find sanctuary and support while processing the emotional challenges of standing up to powerful interests. Rebecca had designed the retreat programs based on her own experience of finding courage during desperate circumstances, creating a model that had been replicated at similar centers in 12 countries. Emma's work with Amnesty International had focused on documenting how government secrecy was used to suppress dissent and accountability in authoritarian countries, providing evidence that helped international courts hold repressive governments accountable for human rights violations. Her research had contributed to legal cases that had freed political prisoners and reformed government practices in countries where transparency advocacy had previously been impossible. The documentary film about their story had inspired a television series that dramatized how ordinary citizens in different countries had challenged government secrecy and corporate power, creating a global conversation about the role of accidental heroism in democratic societies. Rebecca had served as an executive producer for the series, ensuring that each episode emphasized the continuing struggles of working families rather than romanticizing the personal costs of civic engagement. Rebecca's speaking engagements had expanded beyond government accountability to address broader questions about how democratic societies could adapt to technological challenges while preserving individual privacy and citizen participation. Her presentations at technology conferences had influenced the development of artificial intelligence systems designed to enhance government transparency rather than enabling increased surveillance and control of citizen activities. Emma's leadership In international youth, organizations had earned her recognition as one of Time magazine's next generation leaders. But she had used the platform to highlight the work of young democracy activists in countries where such recognition could increase their personal risks. Her interviews with international media had consistently focused on systemic issues rather than personal achievements, demonstrating the same commitment to collective action that had characterized her family's approach to their unexpected influence. The presidential bunker beneath the Ashford estate had been designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site for democratic education, recognizing its role in advancing global understanding of the relationship between emergency government powers and constitutional governance. The site attracted visitors from around the world who wanted to understand how accidental discoveries could catalyze intentional reforms in democratic institutions. Rebecca's work with the World Bank had focused on developing policies that prevented financial crises from undermining democratic participation, ensuring that economic hardship didn't exclude citizens from civic engagement or government accountability activities. Her advocacy had influenced international development programs that incorporated democratic education and civic engagement as essential components of poverty reduction and economic development strategies. Emma's research with the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance had documented how youth civic engagement could strengthen democratic institutions in countries recovering from conflict or authoritarian rule. Her work had contributed to post-conflict reconstruction, programs that prioritize civic education and government transparency as foundations for sustainable democratic governance. The financial security that had transformed their personal circumstances had enabled Rebecca to take risks in her advocacy work that would have been impossible when she was struggling to pay Emma's medical bills and keep their apartment. Her ability to challenge powerful interests without fear of personal financial consequences had made her a more effective advocate for families who continued to face the same desperate choices that had once defined her daily existence. Rebecca's appointment to the International Commission on Democratic Governance had placed her among world leaders working to address global challenges to democratic institutions, but her contributions to the Commission's work had consistently emphasized the perspectives of ordinary citizens rather than political elites. Her influence had helped ensure that international policy recommendations remained grounded in the real experiences of working families rather than abstract theoretical frameworks. Emma's work with the global youth climate justice movement had connected environmental activism with democratic accountability, demonstrating how climate change policies required the same transparency and citizen participation that had characterized their approach to government secrecy. Her presentations at international climate conferences had shown how environmental protection and democratic governance were interconnected challenges that required coordinated citizen action. The legacy of their discovery at the Ashford estate had extended far beyond American politics to influence global conversations about the relationship between citizen action and democratic reform. Their story had been translated into 47 languages and used as educational material in countries where similar challenges to government accountability required citizen courage and international support. Rebecca's work with the International Court of Justice had focused on developing legal frameworks that protected citizen witnesses in cases involving government accountability and human rights violations. Her testimony before the court had influenced international law regarding the protection of civilians who discovered evidence of official misconduct through legitimate activities, ensuring that future accidental whistleblowers would receive legal support rather than intimidation. Emma's collaboration with UNICEF had produced educational materials that taught children around the world about their rights as citizens and their responsibilities to participate in democratic processes appropriate to their age and circumstances. Her work had helped develop age-appropriate civic education programs that prepared young people to contribute to democratic governance while protecting them from adult political conflicts that could compromise their safety or development. The transformation of the Ashford estate into an international centre for democratic education had created a permanent legacy that would continue to influence future generations of citizen advocates long after Rebecca and Emma's direct involvement had ended. The centre's programs had trained thousands of democracy activists, educated millions of visitors, and provided research that had influenced policy decisions in dozens of countries. Standing together at the United Nations podium, Rebecca and Emma represented proof that democratic societies remained capable of renewal and reform when ordinary citizens found the courage to act on knowledge that came with civic responsibilities. Their journey from financial desperation to international influence had demonstrated that extraordinary contributions to human freedom and dignity could emerge from the most mundane circumstances when conscience and courage combined to transform personal crisis into public service. The applause that followed Rebecca's UN speech came from delegates who recognized that her message about the continuing relevance of citizen action in democratic governance offered hope for countries struggling with authoritarianism, corruption, and the erosion of democratic institutions. Rebecca and Emma Torres had proved that democracy's greatest strength lay not in its formal structures, but in its citizens' willingness to act when action served justice, transparency, and the common good, rather than personal comfort or political convenience. Their story had become more than an American success story. It had become a global testament to the possibility that ordinary people could still make extraordinary differences in a world where powerful interests increasingly operated. Beyond democratic accountability, the cottage, the bunker, and the mansion had been preserved not just as historical sites, but as symbols of hope for citizens everywhere who believed that democracy could still be strengthened through courage, truth, and unwavering commitment to the principle that governments must serve the people rather than the people serving governments. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.